The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative-focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
I'm really excited to have my two guests today. They are from Fort Myers, Florida, where I'm also located. Ana-Alicia Lopez is a board-certified music therapist, and she received her undergraduate degree in music therapy from Sam Houston State University and her master's in music therapy with an emphasis in neurologic music therapy from Colorado State University. She's been a board-certified music therapist working in private practice since 2009, so 10 years. That's amazing. And after moving to Fort Myers in 2017, she expanded her practice with help from her husband, business partner, and manager, Chris Howard. Together, they created what is now known as the House of Music Therapy, LLC. The House of Music Therapy, LLC provides individual and group music therapy and adaptive music services across the lifespan. Some of the populations served include children and adults with developmental disabilities, neurological disorders, physical rehab needs, and mental health conditions. Chris Howard, MBA, is an expert in entrepreneurship and scaling small business. His experience spans over a decade, starting, growing, and maintaining small businesses. In 2007, he graduated with an undergrad degree in philosophy from Louisiana State University, and in 2016, he completed an MBA from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. Before moving from Austin, Chris worked internationally in management consulting for a variety of organizations in Europe and acted as a consultant at Gartner, working with some of the largest IT organizations in the world. Today, Chris is the principal owner of Esprit de Corps Consulting and managing partner of the House of Music Therapy, LLC. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today and being willing to talk about your experience creating and maintaining a private practice.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. So you were already in private practice and then you moved to this area and we're like, I'm going to go to a new area and I'm going to start another private practice.
That's right.
What made you decide to go into private practice in the first place? And then hopefully from there, we can talk a little bit about what it was like to move to a brand new place, not familiar with anyone or anything, and launch a private practice.
Sure. So actually, when I was an undergraduate music therapy student, needing to complete my internship, I found an internship in private practice in a local private practice back in Texas. And I kind of just fell in love with, the spirit of private practice and just the, private practice life. And it just kind of happened naturally. And from there, I began working as a contractor with several local private practices, music therapy practices mainly in Texas and in Central Texas. And I just kind of, it was a very, very natural, process. I just kind of gradually started building up my own clientele. And before I knew it, I kind of had my own private practice happening and really had no idea what I was actually getting into.
That's exciting.
Yeah, just kind of ran with it. And Chris, we met in Central Texas and he owned a small business there. And so kind of after meeting him, he, I guess, unofficially started consulting my business and helping me grow. Yeah.
It sounds like that was a great partnership.
Working out pretty well so far.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so what brought you to Fort Myers? What made you move from Austin, Texas out here?
I'll let you take this one, Chris.
Yeah, so our path here is, like many things, is not a straight line. It's sort of a jagged path. So we're here because of me, frankly. What happened? What happened was I was finishing up my MBA at St. Edward's University, and right about the time that I had finished it up, I was the business that I was running in Austin, the business cycle was kind of completing, and I was looking for a new opportunity. And I had a friend who had just moved on from VMware to this company called Gartner.
Mm-hmm.
And she reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in it. I had, I'd studied consulting and whatnot, so it seemed like a pretty good fit. And I interviewed and whatnot, and long story short, Gartner moved me out here. But then after being here for a couple of years, we kind of figured out that there are greater opportunities in the music therapy world here than there are in the IT world.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting fit that they're here. I've always wondered about that.
Yeah,
it is.
What I understand is the executives at Gartner, their main office is in the Northeast, but from what I understand, their executives would come vacation here.
Ah, well, they're from Boston, and the place is right next to the Sox stadium. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, makes perfect sense.
now it clicks.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So you came down for your opportunity and dragged Ana-Alicia along.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, South Florida is not so bad. There's
Right,
lots of great stuff going on here, but certainly not the same kind of music culture that exists in Austin. And I would imagine as a musician, that's one of the most appealing things about that location. And coming here, there's really limited live music in comparison. So interesting. Different.
Yeah. It was very different, and there was a bit of a culture shock when we first moved here. I'm from Austin, Texas originally, so I kind of grew up in the live capital music of the world. So it was a bit different. I kind of expected there to be, musicians on every corner of the street, and I just thought that was normal. But yeah, so it's a bit different. And it definitely has changed the way we've structured our business. But, we kind of found that, growing a music therapy business in Austin, Texas, in the live music capital of the world, has its, advantages and disadvantages. And a disadvantage was we were surrounded by beautiful musicians that all wanted to serve the community. So, there are a lot of musicians working with very similar populations, and there are also a lot of music therapists, board certified music therapists in the area. So it is a quite competitive area to be a music therapist.
So that's a really great, that's some really great insight, like how many people are actually serving that community.
Right. And over here, like you said, live music is quite limited, as with board certified music therapists. They are quite limited in this area. And I kind of feel like we came here for a reason that might have been unknown when we first got here. And we've kind of realized that, along with some of the other local music therapists and music therapy programs, we're kind of pioneering the field of music therapy here in this area, and creating some really wonderful opportunities that this area hasn't seen yet for music therapy, or hasn't had yet. So it's cool.
I would agree. I'm happy that you guys are here. And, the reason that Ana-Alicia and I met is we both have contracts with a similar agency. And I was like, what? You have a music therapist coming? I want to meet the music therapist. And so it really is a needed service in our community.
Absolutely.
And I do think that you came at the right time with the program developing at the local university
Right.
as well. So that's really exciting. So some of the cons of working in Texas was the amount of competition. And I imagine in a lot of larger cities like New York or even Boston, people experience that. And of course here we're limited in all of the creative arts therapists here. It's a limited amount of people. And so there are some advantages in terms of developing a business where there isn't much competition.
Right.
Um, and I'm sure that really helps. But what are some of the challenges that you've experienced in opening a practice in a community that you haven't been familiar with?
Sure. I mean, there have been a lot, and I know Chris can also speak to a lot of the challenges that we've faced personally on more of the clinical end. One of the biggest challenges that I'm facing and that our business is facing is, the community has never heard of music therapy before. And if you don't know anything about music therapy, it's kind of hard to justify why this service might be needed or might be beneficial for different populations. So that's been a big challenge for us moving here to Southwest Florida. No one's ever heard of music therapy before, so educating the community about the benefits of music therapy is although challenging, it's really fun and really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think art therapy and the other creative outlets, if it's dance movement or poetry therapy or something, that there tends to be the perspective that it's arts and crafts, and
Right.
and then people don't really understand the therapeutic aspect of it or
Right.
that piece. So yeah, the educating the community is a huge thing. What ways have you both found helpful in raising the awareness in the community about music therapy and the work that you do, and how you can bring value to the clients that you're serving?
Yeah, so we've had some really cool opportunities, and one thing for me that has kind of helped is talking to Florida Gulf Coast University. They just started a music therapy program there just a few years ago, and are having some of their, I guess, first graduates out of the program, and kind of coming in and writing their coattails. We've kind of been able to speak to the community together, where they might have started practicum opportunities for their students, opening up opportunities for the community to learn more and see music therapy in practice. And then when I come kind of behind them and talk about maybe starting some kind of contractor program there, it's not quite as foreign. Also, I just recently finished my graduate degree from Colorado State University. And with that, I was able to, with their support, I was able to set up some local, I guess, like in services for the community to teach them and talk to them a little bit more about what I do in music therapy and the benefits of music therapy. And so those couple of things have been really helpful for me. I don't know, Chris, what else have we done?
Well, I mean, I think I'll say this first. There's no silver bullet to going into a community, and and I mean, starting any business. Every community is going to have nuances and roadblocks and opportunities, right?
Yeah.
The opportunities that we've come across here in Southwest Florida, a lot of it, frankly, is looking for funding sources. How are people going to pay for this service? I think that's a big part of it outside of advocacy. Advocacy is a big part of it. Music therapy is funny in the sense that when people hear music therapy, their first thought, and I wonder how many listeners are thinking this, that music therapy is it music lessons? Like, do I walk away learning how to play guitar or drums or
Right.
something? By far, that's the most common response that we get. Oh, well, what instrument, should we buy for our child to learn, And you have to explain back, look, the goals are typically non-musical though, we're typically not targeting that. So, I mean, music therapy, it's an interesting widget to sell because, just explaining it to somebody, we're not a plumber coming to town and hanging up a shingle, I mean, people don't know what this is, right? So you really have to take the time to explain it, but even explaining oftentimes isn't really sufficient. You have to show them, they have to actually see it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
That makes it really tough.
Yeah, and I think some of the funding sources that have become available have actually been the best ways that we've been able to advocate, and that's showing the community what we can do and what we do, and really through them talking with their peers and through word of mouth has been some of our best advocacy towards music therapy.
It's wonderful. I think that's a huge component for any private practice, regardless of what the modality is. If people don't know what you're doing, then they're not going to send people your way because they don't know. They need to know who you are, what you do, and why it's of value and important.
Right.
And so I think anytime we can get out into the community and talk about the work is really helpful, or guide people in experiences so that they get to experience what it is. And that helps kind of break down those myths that you were talking about, Chris, about what it actually is. Yeah, I experienced that in art therapy as well. People think it's an art educational experience.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I can imagine that in art therapy as well.
This episode of the Creative Psychotherapist podcast is sponsored by Florida Art Therapy Services. Are you at a point in your career where you are ready to become a supervisor? Are you interested in learning how to go deep using mandala art in your work with clients? We are a Florida Chapter 491 board certified continuing ed provider offering the 12-hour qualified supervisor training for LMHCs, LCSWs, and LMFTs on February 28th and 29th, 2020, as well as June 25th and 26th, 2020. We are also hosting art therapist Carol Cox and Amy Bucciarelli to teach their 20-hour Mastering the Meaning of Mandalas course, April 17th through the 19th, 2020. This course is amazing. It will change the lens you use to view artwork in a truly meaningful way. To learn more or sign up to any of our courses, head to www.floridaarttherapyservices.com.
So, how do you have your practice structured? I think you're unique, and I don't want to give it away, but why don't you tell the listeners how you've gone about building the business and how you started and how you're scaling and growing? Because I know that you are scaling and growing and have some exciting things happening. But where did you start from the beginning?
Well, Anna, maybe you should chat about where you started in Texas. I can only speak for where we started here in Florida.
Sure. So back in Texas, after my internship and kind of just contracting myself out for music therapy services, one of my largest contracts was through a Medicaid waiver program, which is not something Florida has, or not something music therapy is approved for in Florida. But back in Texas, it was available for music therapy services. So that's mostly what I did. That was primarily all my clients came from this Medicaid waiver program, working with children and young adults with developmental disorders. So really, they're honestly beyond me. I was just, just one person doing some contract work, and that's pretty much all it was. And then we moved here to Florida and I didn't know where to start. So I just started reaching out to the local music therapist and the and FGCU, the university here, and just trying to understand the community and where the opportunities were. I took some work that wasn't music therapy work, and I enjoyed it, but I knew I needed to get back into music therapy. So slowly I started hearing about these funding sources. And again, I kind of just started building up my own contracts, here and there individually. And while I was finishing up grad school, and then as soon as grad school finished, Chris and I kind of looked at each other and said, all right, we have a lot of ideas floating around in our heads. So let's see what we can do next. And Chris, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I'll add just a little bit of color. I think that we're unique in the sense that I am not a clinician.
Right.
Oh yes.
Great. I think that's a big part of what makes us a little bit different is that, Anna and I, we really kind of, delineate between our roles in the sense that Anna's role is to focus on the clinical side and my role is to focus just on building the business. And by having that divide, the thing is in Texas, Anna and I, we both experienced owning and operating businesses alone. And being a business owner by yourself is incredibly lonely and incredibly challenging.
It is.
You don't have coworkers that you can just go vent to or anything like that, so you have to be very, you can only talk to certain people and people that are not associated with your business effectively. So they never really understand what you're saying. But anyway, I think that's one of the major things that makes us so different. I mean, whenever we first came here to Florida, I mean, I knew it'd be tough to build a business here. And to be honest, I wasn't sure if we would be able to build a really strong music therapy business here when we first landed. But I knew that, I knew some of the fundamentals that I used in Texas to build my business there that we could probably duplicate here. And a big part of it was, some of the common things, right? Like building a good website, having good search engine optimization. I mean, a lot of our traffic early on and a lot of our business early on came from Google searches.
Right.
And now I think we had, to your point earlier, I think we had a little bit of an advantage here in the sense that there wasn't a heck of a lot of competition. So whenever we created a website, targeting keywords like Fort Myers music therapy, we're immediately the first link within like 2 weeks.
Right.
At the top of Google. So it made us really strong out of the gate in organic searches. But later on, like Anna was saying, about 2 years into it, we started figuring out certain funding sources, scholarships and things like that we could take advantage of. And we started interfacing directly with those entities. And after interfacing directly with those entities and getting some more insight into how much business there is here, that is more or less hard. It was tough to locate, right? There had been legislation had just passed and things like that. People weren't terribly aware of it. And then in Florida, there's just not a strong private practice here for music therapy. I mean, we even find that music therapists are sometimes even averse to it.
That's interesting.
I think it's because, largely I think it's because of the stability. But my response to that is, well, gosh, if you're working in a facility on a grant, that's going to be a heck of a lot less stable than, working with something like Medicaid, Medicaid's pretty darn stable. But anyway, so my opinion, I think oftentimes private practice can be more stable than working for another organization. But to your question about scaling the business, what we aspire to do is, and what we are doing is bringing on contractors and growing our practice that way.
Excellent.
Building up a mentor relationship is what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring in young music therapists who are kind of getting out in the field and help to educate them in private practice, try and coach them, not just on the, as we were saying before, not just on the clinical side, but on the business side. In music therapy curriculums, there's not really much business education,
No, there's not. In any of the therapy, there's really not any education on how to do this part of the stuff, which is why it's so important that we're sharing it so that people have some knowledge and can feel confident. Like, what you're speaking to is there's a lot of fear of stability. And I agree with you. It can be just as stable, if not more stable, because you have total control over it.
Right.
Exactly.
And kind of just to add to that, a big part of what we strive to do in working with these new professionals is to, give them knowledge in order to, give them some sort of protection against other larger entities, facilities, maybe taking advantage of their services and, asking for free music lessons or, uh, or, rates that are just too low to live off of, according to, their education and all the time and energy and money that they've put into what they know now. So that's, a big part of what we want to do is to help educate these new professionals so they don't get taken advantage of, just like so many other new professionals do.
Yeah, especially in this line of work.
Right.
There's such an emphasis on, well, we're doing it to help people, but this is also a profession, and this is also an occupation, and so we did go into developing an education and knowledge base so that we could earn a living, so that we could take care of ourselves, just like any other business.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right. That's really important. I'm glad that you guys are doing that advocacy.
And if I could just comment on what you said a minute ago, you made a comment about fear in going into private practice, and something that I always say is that, being afraid is not necessarily a bad thing. Bravery is not the absence of fear, right?
No.
It's facing that fear and then sort of doing it anyway.
Yeah. It's true. It takes a lot of bravery to say, okay, I'm going to do this. And there's a lot of risk, right? We have to be confident to be able to put ourselves out into the world and experience rejection, which we will, and criticism and skepticism, especially I think with any of the creative arts or expressive arts therapies. There can be a lot of skepticism and a lot of misinformation about what our education really entails.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So once you found that there were some funding sources, then what's the process? If somebody else was trying, to find the funding sources in their community, obviously, I know you met with the folks at FGCU and their music therapy department, but were there anybody else in the community that you reached out to try and figure out where there were funding opportunities? So like, if somebody was in another community, what would they need to consider? Who would be the best people to talk to find those resources?
Well, I can say a lot of the funding sources we identified actually were just following local politics.
Aha.
We followed it to the extent that we were, I just made a habit every day of kind of doing a Google News search for the last 24 hours whenever music therapy was said in the news. And a lot of the funding sources I identified that way, because it was legislation being passed or, someone announcing that some funds were available somehow. As far as reaching out to people, my first advice would be to follow local politics religiously, like really stick with that. But the other piece of it is actually to reach out to parents. Parents have been searching for funding much longer than you have if you're coming to a new community.
Those are great tips.
And through that, finding parents, especially if you don't have any relationships with, maybe you don't have any sort of clientele base yet, finding families who might know more about this topic than the clinicians do. I found them on Facebook, and that's how I started just asking around. Is I reached out to local groups here that targeted that were for families of populations that I worked with, so special needs populations or mental health populations, and I just kind of found them on Facebook and said, hey, I'm here, I'm a clinician, this is what I do, I'd love to talk to you or answer any questions you might have, and reach out to me if you'd like to talk more about this. And I would always have at least one or two every time, or probably possibly more than that, every time I just, pop my head up to say hello, and just building relationships that way through our business. The families and parents gave me great insight into finding funding sources that they're using right now. So, yeah.
Awesome. Those are really, really amazing tips. I think that piece of like connecting directly with the consumers, that market research piece where you're going directly to them to find out what their needs are and how they're being served thus far and how you can kind of tie into that. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then once you found the funding sources, like I know you mentioned the scholarships. So here in Florida, we have something called the Gartner Scholarship, the Gardner Scholarship. And I'm assuming that's what you're speaking to in terms of the scholarship.
Yep.
That's right.
That came from my parents. That's how I found that one. Otherwise, I never would have known that was here.
Yeah. And so once you found that out, then what's the process of being able to accept that kind of funding for your services? Do you have to fill out an application? Is it like applying to be a Medicaid provider? How does
you do have to be like a certified provider in the field, but Gartner is set up in a way where they only accept certain providers, and they only accept, I guess, certain programs that they will fund. So I guess Gartner has been around a little bit longer than music. Gartner has been around a little bit longer. And just recently, I think they added art and music therapy to their services that they approved for. So yeah, you have to be a certified, music therapist or art therapist. And I guess you can go about it two ways. Either the families can request reimbursement for these services themselves, or the providers like me, I can be a direct provider through Gartner by filling out an application and just working with them directly. So I would bill them directly instead of the families asking for reimbursement.
Oh, okay. Very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And have you taken to any other ways of marketing your business aside from going on Facebook and speaking directly to your potential consumers, your website? Anything else that you've been doing to kind of help people in the community know that you're here and what you're providing?
Something that I think is kind of neglected in the digital age is print marketing.
Yeah.
And people, I'm sure people are laughing whenever I say that. But the thing is, the reason print marketing is effective today is because nobody's doing print marketing.
Yeah.
I definitely found in my previous business, I was in the photography industry prior to this, and one of the things that really skyrocketed my business were 4x6 direct mail marketing, just postcards. That just made my business. To be fair, we haven't done that in this business yet. We've done other type of print marketing, like brochures and things like that.
Sure.
But I think print marketing is something that we shouldn't neglect. There's a thing that the USPS does that people will probably be interested in hearing about. It's called every door direct mail. And what it is, for a very low rate, I think it's like 30 cents per piece or 20 cents per piece, they'll deliver a 4x6 postcard to literally every household within a specific zip code. So it's relatively inexpensive, and you can hit a really broad market like that.
Very cool. I'm going to put that in the resources on the show notes. I will look that up. Every door direct mail, and that would be on the U.S. Postal Service website.
That's right. Yeah, and it's really easy to set up. You don't even have to put addresses on the postcards. Like they set it up for you. It's really nice.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it's a really great
awesome.
service. I mean, the thing is, you can't target a specific lead list or anything like that, which we don't really have lead lists too much in this industry, in the medical industry.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to target an entire geographic area, then it's pretty easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I imagine if you went in and did some back end research to identify what communities have and what zip codes have the highest number of like families with children,
Mm-hmm.
then you could target those zip codes specifically, further reaching your audience. And I think that in this area, that would be important because we have so many communities that are very senior focused.
Yep, exactly.
I know we just had Halloween a couple of weeks ago, and my husband and I took our dog for a walk that evening, and we were like, where are all the trick-or-treaters? There was like 3 people.
Yeah.
And it just kind of speaks to the community where we live, is that there's not as many young families in that area. So if we can find the right zip codes, I think that would be an amazing way to just build awareness. I like to think of it as like, one is the know factor. Do the people know that I'm here? Do they know my business name? Do they know my logo? Do they know what I'm doing? And then the other 2 pieces would be like, well, do they like me? And how do I connect with them in such a way that like we can build that rapport and the relationship so that there's trust there. They might like what I'm doing. They might like the idea of art therapy, but they might not know enough to really trust that I'm providing the right service for them. So then how do you kind of get in front of them a little bit more to develop that know, like, and trust factor?
Absolutely.
Right. But that would be one way to get the know out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Very cool. Thanks for that tip. So I feel like recently you posted that you're now going to be in a space where when you started here in the Fort Myers area, you didn't have a brick and mortar office. You're really doing the work from your vehicle. You're driving from location to location to provide the services, which is helpful, and you don't have overhead in terms of an actual building or an office space. But now that you're kind of expanding and taking on additional contractors, are you going to be setting up a brick and mortar office as well?
Sure. I can provide some insight into that. So, obviously any business, any business wants to keep its fixed cost as low as possible, our monthly overhead. So I think what I would encourage people to do is to try and negotiate and find opportunities to not have fixed costs like that. So we're working with a couple of and I'll give you an example. We're working with a couple of facilities in town, such that we're doing group sessions and things like that, and we're more or less dividing the revenue coming out of it. Where they take a portion and we take a portion. And the idea is we don't have to take on an overhead. We don't have to take on a fixed cost. So we don't have to worry about paying that bill every month, but we get the benefit of having the perception of being in a brick and mortar facility. It gives you a little bit more credibility. As opposed to working out of your home. So ultimately, we're working out a lot of agreements with different institutions so that they can market our services within their business.
And that too also decreases your overhead if you have somebody else doing the marketing for you.
Exactly.
And just in terms of time too, your hourly time that it takes to create marketing content, get it in front of the potential client, it's a lot of work.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is.
A huge amount of work. I agree.
That's a really great idea. I think for anybody starting out, that doesn't want to take on the expense of having an actual office. That collaboration. Plus, I think when we're collaborating with the community, it really helps to build and scale at a faster rate than if we were trying to do it in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, I am a firm believer that the other people that we're collaborating with, they're probably going to be a better salesperson for your business than you are.
Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, yeah.
I don't know, there's just something like weird about being, promoting your stuff. Like sometimes it's exciting, but there's also this weird, like, oh, I don't want to be like
Yeah.
a creepy, like used car salesperson kind of thing.
Well, you see, but that's I think that's kind of the benefit of having a partner that's
Right.
not a clinician.
Exactly.
I we can kind of, you can kind of play good cop, bad cop,
Mm.
Right.
And I don't mean that I don't mean that necessarily the way it comes across, maybe. Like, I don't want to be a bad guy ever, but I mean, for me to talk about money and things like that, it takes that liability off Ana. If there's some kind of negotiation or something, then it all falls on me as opposed to Ana. So Ana can go in and deliver services without having to worry about any friction.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That
and
is really awesome.
it's really helped. And, it helps in so many different ways, as clinicians, we like you said earlier, we feel obligated to provide services to our community. And a lot of times that really conflicts with, having to run the business and
Mm-hmm.
charging people and pay rates and negotiating. And it really conflicts with the clinician inside of us.
Yeah.
And so we really are trying to mitigate that conflict. So, and really, Chris, I mean, this is what negotiating business deals and talking, business finance. And this is what he studied specifically. So, whereas when I'm negotiating, like I'm always second guessing myself because I really don't understand fully exactly what I'm doing. I'm just kind of doing what I think is best. But Chris knows the ins and outs of business and negotiating and talking to other business owners. And so he doesn't have to second guess himself. He knows, he knows what to do, and he knows why he's doing it, and he knows that what he's doing and asking is not sleazy, right?
Yeah.
He's not taking advantage of anybody. As a matter of fact, he knows that what he's doing is for the benefit of the community first and of our business, so we can better serve that community. So it's been really, really nice having his perspective because, I mean, I'm sure all clinicians who own their private practice would, if we didn't have any bills, we would just give away our services because this is what we love to do. But we have to make a living and we have to support ourselves so we can support other people. And as many times as I've heard that, it's still hard to run a business as a clinician. And so I'm really grateful that Chris is here, giving me that other side and taking that lead so I can be a better clinician and he can help guide our practice to best serve the community.
I think that is a fabulous relationship.
We like
it is, yeah. Right. You guys are married, but but the business piece where you still have that separation, and that's the thing of working at an agency that is very comfortable. Is typically the clinician isn't exchanging money for the service, right? That's all done magically by some other department. And it's not something that we have to worry about. We just collect our check at the end of the week. Everything is, happy and good. But then coming into private practice, you have to consider all of the business finances. You have to look at, your, expenses and losses and how much money is going where? How do you even determine how to set your fee? A lot of people are like, oh, well, I just, looked at what other people were charging and that's what I came up with. And I feel like for me, that's a terrible idea. Like, I feel like you should do the math and figure out what your personal expenses are, figure out what your business expenses are, and then determine, how many of these services do you need to clear that, and really look at it from that financial analytical perspective in order to set your fee. Because otherwise, you're not going to be making enough money.
Right.
And then you can't stay open.
Absolutely. A lot of what we do is we lean on AMTA, the American Music Therapy Association. They have a lot of really great research about, what are people charging in different geographic areas, and what are therapists getting paid in particular areas, things like that. So it's a really great tool for us to kind of wrap our head around, what type of fees we should be charging. But to your point about doing a financial analysis, I completely agree with you. I mean, doing your, educating yourself, or going out to, to find someone who can help you to build a cash flow analysis to understand, can my business make money? Can I break even? Will these things cover my bills? But I mean, other questions too, do I need an LLC? How do I need to incorporate? Do I need to be sole proprietor, incorporated, an LLC, or what? These are all questions that come up.
Absolutely. I totally agree. This weekend, I attended a conference and I taught a 3-hour workshop on building a private practice for people that want to start. And those were all the things that we covered. And a lot of people don't understand that stuff. It's not something that we're taught in, our school to become a therapist. It's really focused on being a therapist and not being a business owner. And, but those are lots of questions. And then the other one was, well, do I really need to have a business bank account?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
The answer is yes.
And so those kinds of things that are really important on the behind the scenes part of just managing the business effectively, where people don't know just starting out unless they have a guide or a mentor, or they're really seeking out the educational resources that they need to be successful. So it's wonderful that you're able to provide that, Chris, for Ana, so that, she can grow and provide these awesome services to the community. I wish I had a similar relationship with my husband. He has his own business too. So we're both small business owners, but he's really focused on his stuff. He supports my business in other ways by coming in and helping me clean. He's my tech person. Anytime anything goes wrong tech wise, he's my go-to, that kind of thing. But in terms of the selling part of being able to go out and have a vendor table at different events and promote, I've ended up hiring an assistant. And so my assistant, Heather, she has been helping me with that. And earlier in the year, I had some stuff going on personally that kept pulling me out. And she was able to take over and go out and do the talks in front of different groups in the community to educate about what we're doing, which actually I felt like was better, because that took that space off of me to have to be okay, well, this is what we would charge for that. And then people go, what? You're charging that much? How can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's so nice. I'm so glad. Heather, right?
Heather, yeah.
I'm so glad. That's really wonderful. Yeah, it does. When you can kind of disconnect from it a bit, helps a lot.
Right? Or even just having somebody else answer the phones.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right?
Does.
It's a huge help. You can focus on the work that you really want to do with clients and not in all of this other stuff, which does bring up some anxiety and fear of okay, well, I'm not really sure how to deal with this negotiation.
Right.
Well, I think that, it raises another idea that, being an entrepreneur, which is what you're doing when you're starting a private practice, is, it's not a job. This is a lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
Entrepreneurship is not a job. I think anybody getting into it thinking, oh, I'm going to go, be my own boss, and whatnot. I mean, yeah, you are, but it's a lifestyle. You're changing your life.
I totally agree. I think it's really, really important that we intentionally do so that we still have time carved out for our lives, because otherwise the business aspect of all the stuff that we have to do or need to do or perceive that we need to do can overrun our time. And then we're just working all the time, which is no
Right.
good.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And really having Chris here has helped me a lot with that and finding my boundaries. We can kind of, help each other, be accountable for that and for our time management. Just, having another partner here watching the business and running the business, so it really has helped me a lot to also make sure that I am taking care of myself as well.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. Is there anything else that you feel would be beneficial for the listeners to hear about going out on their own that we didn't cover today? Any tips or suggestions?
I think the two best pieces of advice I had were, one, what we said earlier was that, going into entrepreneurship being afraid is okay.
Yeah.
That's it's bravery is not the absence of fear. It's experiencing that fear and moving forward anyway. But the other piece of it I'll say is, if you're entering into private practice or entrepreneurship, you have to commit to going head first. You're not going to go 1 foot in, 1 foot out on this. I mean, like I said, it's a lifestyle. If you want to be successful, you have to be 100%.
I agree. And I guess my advice would be, and something that's helped me, is find your entrepreneurship or private practice community. Find other practitioners that you can come together with and use as a sounding board, because it is lonely out there as a private practitioner, especially when you don't have a business partner like I do, and there's no one to talk to. And still, I mean, there will be things that you can't really talk to other private practitioners about, but it is really nice to have that community there supporting you and helping you navigate all the unknowns that might come up, because there are a lot of unknowns.
Yes, absolutely. And just when you think you're like, okay, I've got a good handle on this. And then something else, and you're like, whoa, where'd that come from? I don't know what to do here.
Exactly.
Never encountered that before.
As they say, if things aren't going wrong, you're probably not pushing hard enough.
Yeah. I heard somebody say that if you're not afraid in when you're doing something, when you're putting something out there to get going, if you don't have a certain sense of fear, then you haven't gone big enough, that you need to go back to the drawing. Yeah, go back to the drawing board. Yeah. Well, if people wanted to find you and the House of Music Therapy, where could they go to find out more information about the work that you're doing and how to reach out to you if they had any questions?
I would direct people to thehouseofmusictherapy.com, our website. You can jump on there and find our contact information, our phone number, email address, all that stuff. If you'd like to reach out to us, you're more than welcome to connect that way. Our email is info@thehouseofmusictherapy.com.
Okay.
And we're also on Facebook at the House of Music Therapy.
Okay. I'm writing all this stuff down so I can put it in the show notes. And what about if people were interested in working with you, Chris, in terms of consulting? Are you taking on new small business consulting clients?
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say is probably reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And we can get a conversation going.
All right. Chris Howard on LinkedIn.
That's right.
All right. Awesome. Well, I am so incredibly grateful for the two of you taking your time today to share your experience in growing and developing a private practice and all of the wonderful resources that you provided. I'm hoping that the listeners find as much value in that as I did today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. It was so nice talking with you today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.